Hello, this is Dr. Randy Wilt, and today we're going to be talking about understanding nonverbal messages. Now, this is a two-part series, and today we're going to just be going over the first part, and I hope you come back for the second part later and hear that section of it. Now, what we're going to be talking about is truly nonverbal as we talk about it in terms of communications. But first, let's understand what nonverbal is. It's a communication that is anything other than written or spoken language that creates a meaning. Now, what's important in there is to understand that it does have to create a meaning. If it doesn't have a meaning, it's not really considered nonverbal. Now, when you look at emotional attitudes of people, take a look at this little chart here. You'll see that most people will look at 92 to 93% in the way they understand emotions based upon the nonverbal action of the other person compared to a verbal or facial expression or the vocal cues. Vocal cues would be something like maybe a sigh or maybe a clearing of a throat or something like that. Now, what's important to know about nonverbal is that it illustrates things for us. And what it illustrates can be anything from a compliment, that it can complement some action you're doing, something you're saying, or it could contradict it, or it could actually accent. It can make it even sound more important. Now, let me give you an example of how that can work. And let's look at the contradicts, because we know how if you nod your head up and down, that means you're in agreement. So if you're saying that you don't like the way you look today, and you're nodding your head, that is what we call the compliment. But let's think about a contradiction. And a good example of this is when I was traveling some years ago in Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, one of the nonverbal movements or gestures they have is with their hands, is when they're saying, "Come here," or "go away." Now, when they're saying "come here," they're actually taking their hand and they're pushing you out. But when they're saying "go away," they're actually taking their hand and they are cupping it, moving it toward them. Just the opposite of what you and I would do. We would actually do just the opposite. We would be moving our hand, "come here," moving our hand toward us with a cup. Now you say, that doesn't make any sense. Well, actually it does. And the reason why is because when they're cupping a hand and they're moving it toward them, think of taking your hand that you are actually throwing something over your shoulder. And that would be the phrase "go away," throwing you over the shoulder. "Come here" would not be pushing you, but actually would be cupping the hand and then scooping down and back. Down and back. So those are some nonverbals that actually would contradict when someone's saying to you, "come here," or "go away." Now, something else about nonverbal is that it actually can make your message believable or unbelievable. Just like I gave you the example of the Bulgarian gestures, which you may see, and you said, that doesn't make sense at all. Let's think about if someone is talking to you, they're delivering a message when they're very, very upset, but what if their voice is not quivering, has joy in it? What if they're smiling? Okay, that would make the message unbelievable. But if their voice was quivering, maybe their face was flushed, talking about that, it was kind of turning red, okay, then you would actually could pick up that they were upset. So this is where the nonverbal actually was complimenting or even accenting it. Now, one of the things that we know today is that we do a lot by texting and by emailing. And this is taking you back about 10, 15 years ago, but this is what we call computer-mediated communications. So you've probably done this. Maybe you've seen some of it where people put things in there. Matter of fact, the first thing I ever saw was the LOL. And I couldn't figure out what that was. People would write to me and they would finish off with a LOL. I thought it meant lots of love. I thought they were really enamored with me. But later I found out, no, it was laugh out loud. Well, look at some of these here. You probably have these all over the place, that you have seen in the past. People put a little smiley face. Those are what we call the computer-mediated nonverbal messages. So here's a few more, and of course there are a bunch of them out there. Now let's talk for a moment here about nonverbals in relationships. So one of the best ways that we can talk about this is called the William Chaplin Handshake Index. Now what William Chaplin said is that you can determine a lot about a person by the handshake, by the strength, the vigor, the completeness of the grip, the duration. Now think back at times you've shook someone's hand. Maybe it'd be too tight, too firm. Maybe you feel like you're shaking a fish. There's just no vigor to it at all, no strength. And how long would you hold someone's hand? Have you had someone who's actually shaken your hand and they've held it there for about 3, 4, 5, 10 seconds. It gets a little awkward. So what William Chaplin came back and said is that these 4 concepts actually can signal a nonverbal how a person feels about you. Of course, depends upon how they feel about you in terms of their culture and your culture. So talking about culture, let's look at this. This is, of course, President Bush. And what's he doing? He's showing a hand gesture. Now, I'm actually at University of Texas, where I came from, and that means hook 'em horns. That's the gesture we do. And actually, President Bush was doing that. He was doing this at a meeting in Houston, showing them hook 'em horns, the symbol for the University of Texas. But that's a very strange signal. And the reason why is because it can mean certain things depending upon the culture. And this is the problem with nonverbals. What may work fine in your culture may have something completely different in another culture. Matter of fact, look up here. You see it says a European culture where it wards off the eye, wards off the evil eye. That's a Scandinavian thing. African cultures, that symbol that looks like the hook 'em horns actually can cast a curse on somebody. Some cultures, it means the bull. The Mediterranean culture, if someone does that hook 'em horns look and they actually have it above your head, that means that you're unfaithful to you. It means a wife or husband could be unfaithful. In a Russian culture, that means if someone does, that means that that person is arrogant. Maybe that person's going to take advantage of you. So this is the problem you get into with nonverbals, is they're very, very cultural related. Now, nonverbal is a continuous action where verbal is not. Verbal will start, verbal will end, but nonverbal continues even after a person stops talking. So they are constantly changing to like a facial expression or a posture or a hand gesture like we showed a moment ago, or maybe even eye contact. And as you look at these, think about some of these things. Think about the ways that you've seen people stand and sit, their posture, their facial expressions. Let's talk about the postures just for a second here, because have you ever seen someone cross their arms? What does that mean? Most people say that means they're closing you off. They cross their arms, standing, sitting, they're closing you off. Well, actually, that's not always true. Matter of fact, it's not true most of the time. Because why do people cross their arms? Well, maybe they are closing you off, or maybe they're cold. When we're cold, we cross our arms. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe they like to just cross their arms. That's the way I am. Sometimes while I'm standing or sitting, I just cross my arms. To me, it's a very comfortable way to stand. But unfortunately, some people look at me and they say, oh, he's trying to close me off. I could be talking to students, close my arms by crossing them, and the student feels like I'm actually closing them. Well, I'm actually not on that. So when you talk about nonverbal messages, they're organized in different codes: kinetics, the appearance of doormans, vocalics, contact codes, chromatics, which is a time and the place. And we're going to talk about a few of these. So let's talk about the kinetics. We've already talked a little bit about the posture and the position where someone is leaning, movement, how you act. Do you open the door for someone who's older than you? Guys, would you open the door for a girl? Girls, would you open the door for a guy? Girls, would you open a door for an older man? I mean, all these things, they are communicating something to you, just like the gesture. Pointing, a lot of cultures, that's completely wrong. It says here steepling. You know what steepling is? That's kind of putting your hands together and sticking your index fingers up like a church steeple. That means certain things in different parts of the world. So once again, here, everything is cultural based. Facial expression, the top part of the face, the bottom, and oculetics. And let's talk about that for just a second here, because when you talk about oculetics, there's someone who actually has figured this out very, very well, and that is Walt Disney. Now, what the Walt Disney Studios figured out some time ago is that people, as we know from research, when you see someone whose their eyes are dilated, who the pupils are dilated, that will cause you to have a warm feeling about the person. So for example, you look at this picture here. This is Belle in Beauty and the Beast. Now look at her eyes. First of all, they're brown. She has big black pupils. And what Disney found out is that when they made the eyes of the characters big like this, the children primarily in the audience started to engage, and they started to have a relationship. They appreciate, they had this feeling of good feelingness about it. So those children later would go and they would just be enamored with Belle, and they would want to go buy things at Belle, for the lunchbox, the dolls. So it was ability for Disney to actually go in there and to get people to really connect with the hero of the film. And here's, of course, a picture of Aladdin in the movie Aladdin, and you can see him compared to Belle. They both have, the big eyes. Typically they're brown too. Disney found out that blue eyes don't always give you the warmth, the nice feeling that the brown eyes do. Now, what's the flip side of that? The flip side of that is your villains. And these are some of the villains you can see looking through here. And it's kind of hard to see some of their eyes. But what Disney did here is they took that pupil, instead of dilating it, they constricted it, which means you have a very small pupil. The smaller the pupil, then the children, and for the most part, all of us, we do not feel the warmth. We do not connect with the person. And if you look at some of these actual villains, you can see how, now here's some that have brown eyes, but for the most part, they're doing gray and blue eyes. Not to say anything about blue and gray eyed people, but Disney found out that when it's not as warm looking to the children wouldn't connect, and they wouldn't go and buy the merchandise on that. Now you say, okay, great. This is great for Disney. How does this work in the real world? Well, I've got a dog, and my dog is a Chow Husky mix, which we call a Chowski. And one thing about Chowskis, they're kind of like being a Chow. They have a really dark eyes. And here's a picture. Now, this is not my dog. I wish it was, but my dog is older, but this is also a Chowski. Now, look at his eyes. Those little black eyes, they look sad and all that. But what I do sometimes is I get right in my dog's face and I grab him by the cheeks and I shake him back and forth and I say, oh, you're my special little puppy, or my special little dog in that case. Now, as I get close to him, his pupils start to dilate. Why? Well, your pupils dilate when you have an affection towards somebody, when you're engaging somebody, just like Disney found out. The other reason why they dilate is, now I like to think my dog has an affection toward me, but the closer you get to things, the more your pupil dilates. So, of course, in the case of my dog is sitting there saying, would you please not get so close to me? You're too close to me. I can't even see you. You're so close. That's why when you go to the eye doctor and they dilate your pupils, all of a sudden things get a little bit more blurry and you get to kind of lean back some. So this is the thing about oculetics is that when you're dealing with eyes, you can read a lot of nonverbal. You can look at your audience. As you're looking at your audience out there, you could literally see who is engaging with you by looking at their pupils. Now, one thing that's always a problem is if you have people who have brown eyes, is very difficult to see their pupils. So therefore, like we saw with some of these villains a while ago, when we're looking at these pictures here, is that we can tell because they're blue eyes, but when they're brown eyes, like in the case here, it's hard to really tell are their pupils dilated or not. But of course, the blue eyes, you can tell a lot. You can tell they're constricted or if they're dilated. And there, of course, is our dog again. Now, let's move along here. Let's talk about some appearance and adornments. The size, the shape, the skin color, texture. Now, let's talk about that just for a second. When I'm talking about skin color, I'm talking not about ethnic color. I'm talking about like if you're flush, someone who is kind of red, have they been in the sun too long, or is it actually because they are, flushing because they're concerned or they're anxious or whatever? Of course, tattoos say a whole lot, hairstyle, clothing, jewelry, all these things. And then you got the smell. And the smell is very interesting too. And the reason why is because smells give you a nonverbal, even though you don't realize it. Like it says here, lemon will increase your perception, your concentration, where lavender creates pleasant moods, but it will lower your mathematical abilities and reasoning skills. That's the reason why if you're going to go take a exam that's going to check out your IQ, or maybe as a statistics or mathematical exam, you probably don't want maybe have a lavender flower in your lapel, or even put on any type of cologne that's a lavender base. However, lavender does, it increases your respiratory rate, but it does also increase your alertness, kind of an oxymoron. And of course, the scent of a rose will lower blood pressure and it will relax you. Now, vocalics. Vocalics are those things that we say or that we do that we really don't know we're doing. Like we may yawn. That's a vocalic. You may kind of laugh without realizing you're laughing. You may say things like ahs and uhs. Those are called segregates. Your pitch, the rate, the rhythm and the tempo of your speech says a whole lot too. Those are all called vocalics. And those are nonverbal. So for example, as I'm talking faster, what's going on here? How do you relate that? Is it because I'm trying to get finished with this, or am I just a fast talker? What about someone who talks really slow? How do we interpret that? You know, most people in the South, like I am right now, we talk a little bit slower, and some people look at that being kind of dumb. And so in our case, that's our culture. Doesn't mean anything to do with intellect, is that we talk slower. So there is a nonverbal people will try to read. Now, that's where we're going to start. We're going to end here on part 1. And I hope you come back and listen to Understanding Nonverbal Messages in part 2. And I hope you enjoyed this, and we look forward to talking to you again.